Okay, we're just going straight in, trying to make this as efficient as possible. Let's see how I go. Kia ora, good evening, talofa, g'day, and guten Abend. My name is Steve from the Cosmic Banter podcast. Welcome back to my existing subscribers and followers. Sounds weird to say, but there are a few of you now. We've hit 50 subscribers on YouTube, and I know that there's only 3 that are my own accounts. Yeah, because if you have more than one Gmail, that's automatically, that by default, that's another YouTube channel. So I just thought, obviously, so I subscribe, but it's still authentic because I do watch back all of my episodes on all 3 accounts. See, this is, okay, settle. Okay, Steve. Keep moving. So we're also going to welcome, hopefully, a bunch of new faces. I say hopefully because I would like to think that people are sharing these episodes with friends and family, whānau who may be interested in the supernatural phenomenon. But also, you may have been introduced to this podcast via this specific episode. I'm hoping that's the case. We have a really, really fascinating story tonight, a really important story, as part of New Zealand history that's untold. And at a selfish level, it's really cool that I get to break this story. But more importantly, I feel very genuinely, I'm being serious here, very privileged to have been entrusted with sharing this story and hosting a platform for the 2 brothers that I speak to share their experience. What is these bubbles? I'm going to leave that in. I don't have time. If you're watching a video, there's just a bunch of balloons that came up. Now, I'll get to that in a moment. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things. If you are new, Cosmic Banter, the Cosmic Banter podcast, basically, this is a platform to allow experiencers of what we in the industry call the phenomenon. The phenomenon, broadly speaking, encompasses just about everything. You know, Bigfoot, poltergeists, paranormal stuff, UFOs, alien abductions, near-death experiences, precognition, ESP, I think that stands for extrasensory perception, all the psychic stuff, all the stuff that's supposedly not real, and yet, even the people who don't think it's real end up having these very, very personal, intense, life-changing encounters, many of whom don't feel comfortable sharing those experiences, even with their closest loved ones. So that's, I guess, kind of the overall mission of this show. I have a deep interest in, the supernatural topic, broadly, and I love speaking to people from all walks of life, and so it's a pretty neat niche where those 2 worlds collide. Now, if you are new to the whole idea of there even being a supernatural realm that exists, then don't worry. Firstly, welcome. And tonight's episode is a nice, easy introduction. It's a UFO sighting. So yeah, and even though it's just a UFO sighting, there's a couple of layers to it that make it pretty mysterious, pretty bizarre. The main element of which is simply this concept of what we call time. Time plays a really big role in this story, and you'll find out in a moment. Just a very quick one on the episode itself. So this occurred in 1973 in the suburb of Burnside, Christchurch, New Zealand. Okay, it was a UFO sighting in the daytime, broad daylight, school day, work day, near International Airport, over suburbia, schools, hospitals, whatever. And so for all intents and purposes, it was a mass UFO sighting. And yet I couldn't find anything on this in the media. There was no coverage at the time on the 6 o'clock news. It should have been the biggest news story that night. Shit of the week. There was nothing on local radio shows, from what we can tell. Nothing in the archives to suggest that anything in any of the local newspapers was printed about it. And 50 years, more than 50 years have passed now. And yet, even on social media, YouTube comments, UFO forums, Reddit, there's nothing. My guests tonight, the two brothers who encountered what they encountered, they, to be clear, they believe that in addition to the four other people that they know for a fact saw what they saw, they believe that there should be dozens, easily dozens, of others who witnessed the same event. And so they're really keen. They're mind-blown. They're more mind-blown than I am as an enthusiast in this subject who thought he knew of every significant UFO case in New Zealand history. It's not that hard, right? Small country. But yet here we are. This is an incredible story, and they're really keen to find other witnesses for their own closure and their own curiosity. So we're going to jump in. A couple of very quick housekeeping things, and I promise you I'm done. This, by the way, is an audio-only episode. About 70 to 80% of my episodes are video interviews. Occasionally a guest isn't comfortable sharing their face. So, I'm not going to lose a incredible, amazing, mind-bending story over some hard and fast rule that I only do video. So now and again, they're audio. Tonight, the two brothers were interviewed over audio. I would just say, whether you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, both obviously have this video up now. I just encourage you for the first, say, 10 minutes to keep the video on. There's some recorded content there that provides a bit of context. And then from there onwards is audio only. Right. Housekeeping. A few things already ticked off. As you could tell, maybe, I don't know. Can you tell? I'm new to this. So I'm not yet earning any monetization. I haven't monetized a revenue share from Spotify or YouTube. We're working on it. We've got to be more consistent and got to chip away. And this is a labor of love. This is a passion project that, honestly, in all seriousness, I mean this when I say it, when I'm doing these intros, when I'm publishing and I share it to TikTok or a friend or whatever it may be, I get a real kick out of that. I'm not even looking at the subscribers or the views. I'm being serious when I say that, because there's not much to look at, to be fair. So yeah, if you would like to support me though on this journey, in the lead up to qualifying for that monetization, I've got a couple of donation links in my bio, in the show notes on Spotify, and in the description section of the video on YouTube. There's two. One is a cryptocurrency donations link if you'd prefer to be anonymous. I don't even get to see your blockchain wallet, so it is private. And for those of you normies who prefer... No, again, I'm ostracizing you. For the beautiful people who prefer to spend credit, okay, donate via credit. I have mad respect for that. Max it out, if anything. Call up the bank and get an increase. No, but credit and debit cards are available to donate through in that second link. Both of those in the show notes. Okay, that's pretty much it. I think. Yes, it is. Let's launch straight in. So, my little intro is, this is the Cosmic Banter podcast. I am your host, Steve, and tonight's episode is Season 1, Episode 16, and the title is The Riddle of Roydvale, UFOs, Time Freeze, and Deep Freeze. I may change that title, I don't have time. As ever, when the phenomenon decides to reach you, keep your eyes peeled, keep safe, but I hope that you reach out to Cosmic Banter. Enjoy, guys. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Peace! Glenn, hey, welcome to the Cosmic Banter podcast. Hey, I'm so glad we were able to meet up so last minute. I appreciate you getting in touch. How are you?
You're very welcome, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, and so just a bit of background, I suppose, for the listeners. I was doing a bit of research, I suppose. I was refamiliarising myself with historical New Zealand sightings and encounters of UFOs and that sort of thing. And of course, the one that comes up so often is the Kaikoura lights.
Yeah.
And yes, there was a little short, it was about 10 minutes, wasn't it? Short video on that on YouTube.
Correct. Yes, I've seen that many times.
Because you would perhaps have remembered that incident at the time being reported in the media.
Oh, yes. It was
Okay,
very
well,
high profile.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that. More importantly, and I suppose the main reason I'm chatting to you tonight, Glenn, is you left a comment on that YouTube video describing your own sighting.
Yeah.
And this predates the Kaikoura lights by 8 or 9 years, doesn't it?
Yes, so we've thought about this quite deeply because we were primary school children, about the exact year. So it would be 1972, 1973 or 1974. More likely 73 or 74.
So this was at Roydvale Primary School.
Yeah.
Just for the listeners, can you describe, I mean, you're in Christchurch, New Zealand.
That's right.
What suburb, for the New Zealand listeners that are familiar with Christchurch, where is the Roydvale Primary School?
Okay, it's in the suburb of Burnside. Memorial Ave is the main road which goes from our airport into the city. So Roydvale Ave runs off Memorial Avenue. And it's probably about, again, I'm trying to think of distances. It might be a kilometre away from Memorial Avenue.
I'm just looking at the map, and you're right. It's awfully close to the airport.
Yeah, and the old deep freeze base.
So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I shouldn't say old because it's still there, but back then and for quite a few years until reasonably recently, the US Navy ran the aircraft into New Zealand and down to the ice and back again. Look, there would have been airport radar, and I'm sure these things, they would have been, I don't know that they were flying over the US base, but it wouldn't have been too far away. I'm sure if anyone had tumbled to what was going on, they would be among the first to know, I'm sure, or be told.
Oh yes, especially, well, this is conjecture, but I imagine especially back in those days, where New Zealand's even smaller, and America's not just the big brother, I suppose, the big dad, really. And
oh,
so
yes, indeed, yeah.
Yeah, so if they're so close, you would think that, yes, we would report it, most likely to...
You certainly shoulder tap them and say, hey, we've just had this happen. But then again, maybe nothing showed up on radar. The whole thing just seemed weird to me, though, because you'd see it from the control tower.
Okay, so 73, 74, and I mean, shall we just crack into the story? Do you want to take us back to the very start? So, firstly,
Sure.
what was how old were you roughly, do you think? And what was the name of the school? What was the day like? Take us back, Glenn.
Okay, I would have been about 10 years old. I'm 61 years old now. I was born in 1963. So if you say about 1973, 74, it's about 10 years of age. And the incident took place at Roydvale Primary School in Christchurch, New Zealand. And just prior to the sighting, it was a bright, sunny day. So we were out in the playing fields at the back of the school. Just people playing cricket, running around, generally doing what kids do. And the day suddenly went very overcast and eerily still and quiet. And then there was no sound or anything, but my eyes, and obviously the eyes of most of the school, turned upwards, and from my right-hand side, there were 3 discs that were in like a V formation and passed overhead from right to left. No sound, nothing. Everything except those discs seemed to be frozen in time. It was as though someone had hit pause on the videotape. And once they had transited and were out of view, it was as though someone had hit play. And everything went back to normal, and the sun came out, and everyone just went back to doing what they were doing, and no one said anything. And my brother was there at school. His mate, very close friend at the time, saw it as well. So my brother, his friend, 2 of our neighbours who were both at the primary school, confirmed that they'd seen it. And strangely enough, just a few years ago, a friend of the family who is now in Australia, who I didn't know had witnessed this, said to my sister, because she's great friends with my sister still to this day, said, "Can you just ask Glenn if he can remember seeing something strange at school? He might think I'm crazy, but can you just ask him if he remembers something strange happening at school?" And I immediately went back to my sister to say, "Can you ask Kate, was it, 3 discs, three UFOs, basically?" I think that's what I said. And she came back and said, "Yep, that's it."
Wow. Okay, so this is corroborated by not only your brother, but later on your other friend who's in Australia now.
Yep.
Did you mention before we started recording some neighbours as well, or a neighbour
Yes.
at the time?
We had 2 boys who lived over the road from us who were friends of ours, about the same age. And a little while later, I can't even remember how long after the incident, we said, "Do you remember seeing that at school?" And they said yes. And of course, my brother, who was friends with a close mate, not neighbours, someone else, they've talked about it often over the years, though they've lost contact now for quite a while, but they did talk about it for quite a few years afterwards.
That's incredible. Let's go back to the moment you saw them. I mean, I have a number of questions. Firstly, can we just focus on the weather? That sounds like something out of a movie or something almost. So it was a bright sunny day, and then it got
Went overcast and
okay.
very still and quiet. Everyone in the field stopped playing. All the noises that kids make when they're out in the playing field stopped. Birds stopped chirping. It was as still as anything.
Wow.
Still and overcast.
Is this like a lunchtime or a morning tea
I
break?
can't remember, to be honest with you, whether it was more, we would call it morning playtime, afternoon playtime, lunchtime. I'm not sure.
Yes.
I just couldn't tell you. But what my brother saw was even stranger, though. I was looking up. He and his friend were looking around, and everything had frozen.
Really?
Mm.
So not only did it feel as if time had frozen, like the sounds of the children and the birds had stopped and everything felt still, but your brother seems to reckon that everything looked frozen.
Yeah, because he and his friend, for some reason, weren't looking. They of course witnessed it as well, but then they weren't sort of frozen in place. They were looking around and could see everyone else just staring upwards.
Oh, so all the children were looking up at it, but frozen.
Yeah.
And I presume that you tried to discuss this with other classmates, and there's only...
No,
you
this
didn't?
is what's strange. The minute everything went back to normal, everyone went back to normal as though it never happened. No one said, wow, did you see that? Nothing.
Oh my God.
It was just like life had just paused, frozen, and then these things transited across the sky, and then bang, hit play, everything went back to normal. To be honest, I can't even remember how long it was until I spoke to my brother about it. But believe me, we've spoken about it quite a bit over the years.
Wow.
It's quite unique in that I don't think too many UFO sightings also have this time freeze and weather change involved.
No, I mean, I've heard of similar things in, the broader realm of the supernatural, the sort of these types of stories. But in terms of your classic UFO sightings, especially ones that involve a number of witnesses, or shall I say a number of potential witnesses, and in this case, well, so only a few of you weren't frozen. That's
and we're talking
peculiar.
we're talking about what must have been dozens and dozens of children. But
Yes.
I'm just, as I spoke to you before we actually started the podcast, I've scoured the internet trying to find people reporting this. Nothing, absolutely nothing.
No, I did the same actually. As soon as I read your comment, before I replied to it, I thought, if this is real, and even though at that stage you were just a random person on the internet, I don't know why someone would sort of make that up. But even before we'd spoken, I thought, if this is real, this is a part of New Zealand history. Surely, if it flew over a school, there'd be plenty of reports. So I Googled it myself, and no, I couldn't find anything either.
Not only that, but the airport, Christchurch International Airport, is close by, and also the American deep freeze base. It was the US Navy at the time.
Yes.
It's not anymore. The Navy have given up on it, but the deep freeze base is still there. But back in the day, it was the US Navy who were running that. You would think with radar, with the airport and the US Navy and everything, and you'd think that maybe something would be in black and white somewhere, but not that they're going to let on.
Who knows? There may have been something, but unless there was, public uproar, or a number of sightings, and it got into the media, then perhaps they'd have no reason to report on it.
Right. And as you would know, there are a couple of agencies, an international one and a New Zealand one, where you can report UFO sightings to.
Yes.
And I've done that on both those sites and haven't heard a thing back. Also, the one in New Zealand asks a lot of detailed information, which, again, we're talking about, this is going back to the mid-ish 1970s. And I was a kid at the time, so I don't know in what direction it was flying. I couldn't even tell you how high they were. They certainly weren't too high. They were quite low, but I couldn't tell you in meters how high they were. So I was just able, basically all I did was report what I did on that comment section for the Kaikoura lights video. So exactly the same thing, left my details, and never heard back. But to me, the most important thing was, now at 61 years of age, I've spoken to my brother about this, we want to sort of at least get it down in black and white, that this is what we saw, this actually happened. I don't want it to sort of, die out.
No, good on you, Glenn. I feel the exact same. And I didn't even witness it. As soon as I read that, I thought that we can't let this story slide. Okay. I want to get to the description of the crafts in a moment. But I just want to revisit this eerie frozen time sensation thing again, because it's so fascinating. So, okay, I'm picturing you're at school, it's a sunny day. Let's just say it's morning tea, lunch, whatever. It's around that time, you're on break. So the school size, it's a small primary school, but at least dozens of kids would be out on the
It would have
field.
to be dozens of children out there, yeah.
Okay. So you get the sensation that time has frozen, in the sense that everything goes quiet and the weather sort of packs in a wee bit, and then you hear the noises again. So your brother said, did you say him and a friend were
him and his close friend at the time, they, rather than just looking up, which was what I was doing, I didn't look around me, I just looked up, and I had the sensation that everyone else was looking up as well. Well, my brother was kind of looking up and witnessed it, but he also looked down and around, and so did his friend.
Glenn, and you said that your brother and his friend saw everyone, all the other kids, frozen, but that they were also looking up at it, at these craft.
Yeah.
So there's this. What do you think that is? Do you think it's some sort of memory wipe, or did they, just as they went up to look at it, clearly I'm assuming here, but the craft had some sort of influence over space-time or something. I mean, what are your thoughts on that part of it?
As far as a memory wipe, I couldn't tell you, because I don't know what those other kids remember. You know, as far as I'm concerned, why would that happen to some and not others? I mean, why would I remember it? I'm nothing special, you know. I'm sure other kids would have seen it and remembered it. You know, if some of them didn't have friends to corroborate it with, and they just, you know, went about their business and then thought about it later on in life, you know, they could well have put it down to maybe having dreamt it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, it never happened. I was young. Oh, maybe I dreamt it at the time, you know, and it wasn't a real event. The only thing that keeps me grounded is the fact that I've got people that I can talk to about it who saw what I saw.
And I bet you're glad that you do, because otherwise you'd have this vague memory.
When I really sit down and think about it, and when my brother and I talk about it, you know, we say this is a fairly momentous thing that has happened. You know, not many people get to witness what we witnessed. And that's why, you know, I'm a fairly skeptical guy, you know, ghosts, goblins, look, even UFOs. If this hadn't happened to me, I may well have thought, oh, you know, this can't be true. We would know for sure by now. But lately, with the increase in communications, you know, everybody on the internet, etc., you know, we're hearing some very, very viable people coming out and saying, look, I've seen things. You know, military aviators, US Navy, have chased these things.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, it's to the point now where you'd almost be silly if you just dismissed it out of hand.
I agree. It does feel, and I mean, I'm biased because I've been interested for a while. Although, like you, Glenn, I'm skeptical. I don't accept anything at face value. But it does feel like that, doesn't it? That there's been a switch, and most people, if you sort of talk to them about it, it's not. You're not in cuckoo land just by bringing it up. People may not be interested, but they sort of have heard enough in the mainstream that they accept there might be something to it. I'm still so fascinated about the missing time thing. The last question I'll have on that, and let's get to the description again, is the reason I ask about whether there might have been some sort of memory wipe. The only reason I say that, Glenn, is surely when it was over and everything sort of unfroze, then if these kids had seen the craft, surely this whole schoolyard would be talking about it in that moment.
You would think so, wouldn't you? But I didn't have a memory wipe, and I didn't talk about it.
When everything sort of came back to normal, though, what you mentioned, it was kind of like hitting play again. So everything was there wasn't sort of a lapse, and like it was people sort of groggy coming out of it. It was quite quick.
It was like just life carried on exactly as it had before the time freeze.
And I suppose the only thing is, even if they had, let's say the other children had seen it, it still doesn't explain why they appeared frozen and then a few of you weren't frozen.
Well, when I say now, I should have checked this with my brother before coming on, but I'm sure he said that some of the kids were playing cricket and that the batsman was taking a shot and was basically frozen in place.
Wow. Daryl, welcome to the Cosmic Banter podcast. How are you doing today, mate?
Yeah, good, thanks, Steve. Thank you. Thanks for having me on and letting me tell my little bit of my experience and story. It's been pretty important to me. Been pretty important to me to at least have somebody listen, and so it's pretty good.
Well, that's sort of the same vibe I got from your brother Glenn. Was that, and I know you've got a different perspective and a different side of the story, which we're going to hear soon. But he was very, very certain that he didn't want this story to be lost to history. Do you feel the same way?
Yep, absolutely. Because I think it's, in my life, it's probably the biggest thing I've ever had happen to me ever, and it's something I can't explain. And I suppose it's as I say, it's a, whether you call it a UAP or UFO or whatever, it's something that's unidentified, but it's more than that to me, because everything surrounding it is a little bit more involved and a bit bigger. Certainly that's how I feel, and it's just something I didn't want to have lost, because I think there's just too much involved, and especially in today's climate, I think it's important to get it out there, just at least to get it out there, if nothing else.
No, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I don't know if Glenn told you, but I found his comment on a YouTube video and replied to him, and I was thinking, look, this is New Zealand, not just New Zealand UFO history, but just New Zealand history, period. I did my Googling and couldn't find anything on it. Obviously, you guys have had decades
decades.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and I've found absolutely no clue about this event ever occurring. And because the most famous one obviously is the Kaikoura one.
Yes.
But as I said, that's it. And I don't want to compare, but I'm thinking, man, this is pretty big compared to that one, in my eyes, anyway. So I agree.
Yeah. I agree. Not that it's a competition. I think the Kaikoura lights, though, aren't that an impressive story in the whole scheme of UFO history. It's just that they were caught on radar and media attention and all of that stuff. But look, you have a great story. I'm really eager to hear your perspective. And you did touch on, before we started this, how it sort of impacted you a bit more than just the sighting. So we might get into that a bit later. But Daryl, do you want to start right from the start? Take us through that day. What happened?
Yeah, sure. So the school we were at was Roydvale Primary School. So I was the youngest of three. We all went to the same school. It was just around the road from us. And, obviously, we're well used to it. So it was our school. We were well used to the grounds and everything. And it was a sunny day, and I'm pretty sure we were on a break. Because everyone was out playing sport. We're all sort of wandering around the yard. So I'm pretty sure it would have been a break. Now, I'm sort of looking at dates, and that's something that my brother and I talked about. And I'm probably saying it was around about 1973-ish, sort of around that regions, which would have put me, I was born in 66, so I would have been about 7, or it could have gone into 74, but it was around that region. Now, in the context of when it was in the year, now this is quite important, I feel it is, that back in our day, seasons were broken up for cricket and rugby, very not like they are nowadays. Okay, so this may sound like we're going all over the place, but it will make sense in the end. That we had cricket was always a summer sport, so it always kind of started, in September, certainly back in the 70s and all that. Then you went into winter, it was rugby, and that's how it rolled around. It didn't morph into different seasons like it does nowadays. So the reason I say that is it was a sunny day, and I was standing in the school grounds. I know exactly where I was standing. To this day, I still do. So where I was standing in the school grounds had off behind me was like a concrete area, and behind me was a concrete hill which had a fort on top and steel sort of pipes. And that was like our play area. It was off just behind me, and I was kind of looking north in a northerly direction, just playing and doing our thing, and people were out playing sport around the cricket grounds and all that, the cricket pitch out in the field, just doing our normal thing. Now, I remember seeing, and it was still sunny at this stage, and it was a really fine day, and I remember seeing 3 objects sort of coming from the north. And it was coming on a slight angle, but coming towards me. And I just noticed them, and I thought, that's strange, because we live near an airport, and I'm used to planes. We've been around planes all our lives. We used to see news shows and all that, so I kind of knew planes very, very well. But I saw these 3 objects coming towards me, towards the school, and they were coming over what we used to call it. I remember it being called the graveyard. It was actually just an area where we found bones for sheep and all that. It was over kind of in the northern corner of the grounds of the school. And I saw these 3 objects coming from that direction towards us. So I'd say I'd be heading more sort of a southwest sort of area as they were coming towards us from the north. And as it was coming towards me, sunny day, I'm just looking at them, couldn't hear anything. And just all 3 are moving towards us. And then I remember the whole sky changed, like literally in an eye blink. It just was grey, like just an overcast, cloudy day. And these objects were still coming, and it just totally grey, the whole sky. But the weird thing is, I looked around, and the whole school was either looking up at these objects, or they were frozen, and almost like you would say frozen in time. And I remember looking at there was a cricket match sort of off to my left in the field, and there was virtually frozen in mid-game. And I distinctly remember it was as if someone was taking a shot. You could see someone take a shot, but they were frozen. So nothing was happening. And then other people were looking up and looking at these objects. But I was looking around, which we'll get to later, which always bothered me because I couldn't understand why everyone else was frozen, but I could look at what was going on around me. And then I remember looking back up at these objects, and they weren't screaming across the sky, but they came across the sky and above us. And then as I looked at them, they were almost in like I suppose you say a V formation, but they were very, very close to each other. No noise, no wings, that classic sort of disc sort of shape as they came across, and like in a silvery sort of colour. And as they came across, no noise. You could see no jet thrust or anything. And I couldn't see any discernible sort of bulges or anything, just disc shape came across right above me. No sound whatsoever, and then just slowly disappeared off behind me. And then immediately when that happened, bang. The sky changed, and everyone's back playing cricket, all our school, mucking around in the school grounds and everything. And everybody's doing it, and then we went back to class. And that was it. There was nobody said anything. No one mentioned anything. No one had a word to say about it. We went back to class, and that was about it. And I'm thinking, well, Years later, you look at that and go, that's kind of weird, It's just very strange. And as I said, we've been around aircraft, with the airport right just down the road from us all our lives, so we certainly knew what aircraft looked like. I used to lie in Burnside Park and stare up at planes as they went overhead, because as kids, you're allowed to do that sort of thing back in the day. Just went wandering out to the park and have a look, and I used to love it. Could almost touch them. So these were they felt like they weren't that high. And as I say, they were coming overhead. They were just dead silent, and nothing from them. No, as I say, no features. Couldn't really see anything. There's certainly no wings or anything. Just that classic sort of disc shape as they went across, and then just disappeared. And then the sky just changed, and we went right back to, as I say, doing our sports then and going doing school. It was only years later that we all started discussing it and talking about it. So I don't know. It's something
Wow.
the thing that's bothered, as I said, like, you hear all these different people that have seen UAPs or UFOs, whatever you want to call them, but it's the fact that the sky changed and everything froze, like, except me and a friend of mine, pretty sure it's in the same boat, because it comes to another story down the track, which isn't connected with this, but that I could look around and see people as these objects were coming across over the top of us. As I say, they weren't going at a great rate or not. So they weren't going slow, but they weren't going fast. They were just like, I would say, probably like in a cruising speed, if you look at, say, if you're talking about a plane. And then I just remember looking, as I say, at the cricket match, all that frozen in time. Everything was frozen in time. Everyone was just either looking up or frozen in what they were doing, except me looking around and wandering, And then, as I say, then instantly it's changed, and we're back to playing sport and everything. And then nobody discusses it. Until obviously we got a bit older, and we just started discussing it years down the track. And we had friends who went to school with us, or neighbours, they lived across the road from us, and they ended up going living in Moscow, just outside of Dunedin. And but they ended up discussing it with us, and we're all just talking about this incident all of a sudden comes up, and it's as I say, it sort of stuck with me for a long period of time. As we said before we came on, there's been what's quite point about this is the older I've got, the more it's bothered me,
And I want to get to that, Daryl. Before I lose it, though, I do want to just thanks for that description. That's very similar to, well, it's exactly what your brother Glenn described, which I think is good, and the listeners will just have to trust me on this. But beforehand, before we started recording, Daryl, I didn't tell you what I had, what Glenn, your brother, had told me last week, did I?
No, you didn't.
No. Okay. Because that was important for me. I really wanted to hear your perspective, and if there were some discrepancies, that's fine, because he was very open to, look, it was a long time ago, and I'm concerned that I might be getting this a little wrong, da-da-da-da-da. So I can say that what you've said so far has matched what he mentioned, which is interesting.
I don't know whether Glenn mentioned too that we actually when I say quite recently, within the last year or so, we went back to Roydvale Primary, both of us, as now, not that long ago. When I say not long ago, probably been about a year or so ago, because believe it or not, we hadn't done that. I mean, so as I say, as we've got older, we've decided that we really need to get this out there. But we wanted to know where we were. And when we were discussing it, when we were standing at the school, well, I knew exactly where I was, pretty much in the school where I was standing. But Glenn was looking at it from a different angle. So obviously he was somewhere else in the field as they came across. And I know he said that to me, because he said, oh, well, I didn't see that, because I was almost directly underneath them as they came across. And I think that's what's quite different from Glenn and me. And that is something I'm absolutely bang on positive about, of where I was and what I saw, because I was looking directly straight up at them. It would say I was looking up as if it was like looking at the bottom of them as they were coming across. And so they were coming sort of directly at me, kind of on an angle from a northerly direction. And I just remember them going right over the top of me. But before that, I'd already looked around at what was going on with the school. So I was like, how's it gone from sunny to overcast? And then everything just shut down and froze, except me. And then I looked up and saw them coming right across the top of me. And Glenn sort of said that, well, I think they were coming from my right to my left. I said, well, you must have been somewhere else in the school. But I said, but I distinctly remember how I saw them where I was standing, and that fact that and where they were coming at me from when I first noticed them, when it was still sunny, and then the weather changed, and that's when I started looking around and said they were coming at me. Yeah. So I know we were in different parts of the school.
Yeah.
He said to me, oh, when I saw it from here, so you must have been a different part, because I'm absolutely bang on know exactly where I was standing that day.
So Daryl, that's interesting, because I sort of pulled up the map with Glenn and tried to work out, roughly where he was standing and therefore what direction. And I sort of roughly worked out that they might have been coming, I guess, if you think about towards you, coming from the northwest. Is that what you said earlier, northwest?
Yeah.
Or did you say northeast?
Yeah, I would say more northeast.
Okay.
Where I was standing, if I'm looking kind of in a northerly direction, so I'm at the school, looking towards where the airport would be, which is sort of in a northerly direction. It was kind of just slightly off to my right that I noticed these objects right at the very start. Then they were coming across on a slight angle and coming across the corner of the back corner of the field. So that would be to me, it would be like a slightly northeasterly direction.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Daryl, you mentioned, you emphasized how for you, a really sort of notable feature was the sky sort of becoming all overcast. I want to get to that in a moment. Mm-hmm. But before we lose it, maybe a bit selfishly, the part I'm most interested about when Glenn first told me the story was that he said to him, he described all noise stopping, like the kids playing, the birds, all of that, the cars, everything silent. And he also described the weather, turning overcast. And then he said it was like, when they left, it was like hitting play again.
Yes,
so
exactly.
that's kind of what you've described as well.
Yep, exactly what happened. Yeah.
He did say, and he wanted to verify this with you, but because he was really concerned about getting the facts right. But he said, I'm pretty sure my brother said that him and his mate looked around and everyone was frozen, including the Batsman. And that's what you've just said. Can you? That is so fascinating, and I've got all sorts of theories in my head, but it's not my story. But can you just maybe close your eyes and just sort of picture yourself back there as a kid on the field, wherever you were, and you look up and you see these things, the clouds come over. So just take us back. Can we just slow it down a bit? Take us back to that moment. And can you describe when you did look down and see the other kids? What did it feel like? What did it sound like? And specifically, what did you see?
Well, what I saw was, for a start, when it becomes cloudy, it's instant, like bang. So it's not even a delay, it's just instantly becomes grey and everything just shut down. Then, like Glenn said, it's dead right. It's just frozen in time. And I looked off slightly to my left, and there was a cricket match going on one of the cricket pitches out there. And let's say that game was frozen in time. Batsman was taking a shot, and I just remember looking and going, in my young head, going, that's weird, and then looking around at the rest of the school, and some of them are looking up. But I'm just thinking more about this cricket match, and me go, that's weird. Then I looked up, and that's when they were starting to come across the top of me, and it was still, grey as overcast, but quiet as quiet. And that's why, because it was so quiet, as far as I'm concerned, if it's a plane, I know what a plane sounds like. A plane, because it's dead quiet. Well, because there was no noise. But these things just came across the sky silent, absolutely nothing. couldn't hear anything from them. And then, as I say, it was just like, bang. As I said, no delay, bang, it's sunny again, everyone's playing. Just instant. Yeah.
So I don't want to sound pedantic, but I just want to once again hone in on this batsman. Are you saying that someone was bowling and he was ready to
Take a
bat
shot. Yes,
and he was frozen?
Yep, he was mid-shot.
He was mid-shot.
Yes, mid-shot, because that's what I remember looking at. I remember looking off to my left, and this batsman was just like mid-shot. I can't remember whether it was a cover drive or whatever, but it was a mid-shot, and he was just stuck in mid-shot.
Where was
the game? I can't remember. That I wouldn't know, but I certainly know he was taking a shot. Can't remember where the ball was. I can't remember the specifics of like the bowler was here, but I just remember because I focused on the batsman because that's kind of weird. You've got a batsman that's frozen in mid-shot. There's nothing else was moving, and he was just there in mid-shot. But I was moving around, and he was.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And
that's the interesting part.
Yeah, I was able to look at that, take that in, and then also look at these objects and as they came across the sky and look at the rest of the school before I looked up. And I'm like, why was I able to do that? Because everything else is frozen.
Well, that's why I asked, because the reason I'm so interested about the aspect of this batsman being frozen is, I suppose, to anyone listening to the story that might be skeptical. I mean, there's so many parts to pick apart. I don't know where you would start, but if they were to be pedantic and pick it apart, they might say, well, it just sort of, it was an eerie vibe and it appeared that everyone was frozen because they were all looking up at it, but the batsman wasn't looking up.
No, the batsman was taking a shot.
So the batsman was affected by the presence of these craft flying over, even though he wasn't looking up at them like everyone else.
Yeah, he wasn't staring up at the craft. He was taking the shot, but he was frozen.
Were there other cricket players and kids that were also not looking up?
I can't remember, because I think I so much focused to my left on the gate and that batsman. It was almost like my eyes got fixated to the batsman, and I just saw the batsman frozen there.
Amazing.
So I can't really say about the fielders and where the bowl, like I said, like the bowler, where the ball was, but that's the batsman, because it was just like he was stepping forward, taking a shot, but he was stuck. And I'm like looking, going, well, and I remember in my young head thinking, well, obviously I was thinking, well, that's weird,
So the crafts themselves, did you look up because of the change in weather and the silence, or did you what triggered you to look up firstly?
That's a great question, and I honestly do not know. It could have been just that my eyes, the eyes of the people that we were looking up, just drawn there for whatever reason, just drawn upwards, because these things were not making any noise. So I can only think that it was just like, we just looked up because we knew something was there. Sometimes people get a chill down their spine and they think someone's looking at them and they'll turn around and have a look. Maybe it was something like that, but it was a very long time ago, and I really can't remember what what drew me to it or drew anyone to it. But all I know is that, I looked up and I saw what I saw.
Let's just hone in again on the description of the craft. So there was 3 flying in formation.
Yeah, V formation.
A V formation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you described them as flying saucers. So
silver discs, yep. That's a cliche to say it, but that's what they were. Silver discs.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's cliche for a reason.
Yeah.
Everyone can picture a classic flying saucer. We've all seen it in movies, but I know it was a long time ago, Glenn. Is there anything, if you just sort of, I don't know, close your eyes and just sort of think back to that moment? You're in school, you're on the field, your eyes are drawn upwards, and there's 3 craft in a V formation. Are they just flat plates, or does it have a sort of top to it?
Now, that's a good question because I'm trying to remember and I simply cannot remember. As far as I'm aware, they were featureless. I don't recall any windows, put it that way. Whether or not there was a hump in the middle, I couldn't tell you. I just remember them as 3 silver discs.
And again, I know this is a while back, so you're doing great, Glenn, but it'd be remiss of me not to ask.
Oh, yeah, please ask, yeah.
Roughly how high off the ground do you think they were?
Okay, they were not high, but they weren't like real low either. They weren't treetop skimming.
Yeah.
That would be very hard for me to actually put an actual height on it. I'd be wrong. Look, I'll throw a number out there and I'll do it in the old imperial terms, feet, a couple of 100 feet, maybe. Yeah.
No,
which is pretty low.
That's pretty low. Yeah. Okay, a
Yeah.
couple of 100 feet. And were they directly above you, Glenn?
They started on my right-hand side and moved from right to left.
That's right. Remember you saying now, when they passed from right to left, were they straight over the top of you, or were they just sort of in front of you?
They were kind of in front, yeah.
Yeah.
So so I wasn't looking like directly upwards. So for me, for some kids it would have been directly above, but for me it was sort of in front. Look, there would have been airport radar, and I'm sure these things, they would have been I don't know that they were flying over the US base, but it wouldn't have been too far away. I'm sure if anyone had tumbled to what was going on, they would be among the first to know, I'm sure, or be told.
So tell us a bit more about that. This is what the old US Navy base, is that right?
I shouldn't say old because it's still there, but back then, and for quite a few years until reasonably recently, the US Navy ran the aircraft into New Zealand and down to the ice and back again.
Glenn, have you heard of any other? I'm sure you've seen plenty of stories on other UFO sightings, but specifically around schools. Have you heard of the Westall incident in Melbourne?
Yes, I have, and there's one in Zimbabwe as well, wasn't there?
Yes, Ruwa, Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
Yes,
where it actually landed, and the kids went out and greeted these beings and interacted with them, and it was a really, really strange one.
Oh yeah, that was. I think that's one of the most compelling stories, because you have famed psychiatrist John Mack go out from America in the 90s to Zimbabwe and interview these children, and it was his professional psychiatric assessment and determination that these children weren't making it up. They weren't hallucinating. They expressed signs of trauma from a real experience. They were interviewed extensively at the time. There's dozens of them that saw these beings and this craft land. And then you have documentarian James Fox. Not sure if you saw, is that where you saw the Zimbabwe incident, his documentary?
I saw it on YouTube. I don't know who the actual producer or director was for that one.
Right. Well, for anyone listening, and for you as well, Glenn, I'd highly recommend James Fox's The Phenomenon. And he really was the first to revisit that story after John Mack, the psychiatrist, went in the 90s. And he interviews the children as adults. And then more recently, there was a Netflix documentary or series that featured that story, and they interview the adults again. So that's a really compelling one. And then the Melbourne one happened in the 60s, I believe, Westall.
Okay, I remember reading something about it, but I'm less familiar with that one. I mean, front and centre, the Zimbabwe incident is the one that really is front and centre of my mind. But yeah, definitely I recall something about Westall in Melbourne. Yeah, was it a landing?
It was a landing.
Okay.
And look, I'm not trying to, make your story into something it wasn't at all. Obviously, it was perhaps a rung down the ladder of those two stories.
Definitely, yeah.
But it's still history. It's still a really, really important event in New Zealand's UFO history. Just because they didn't land, I just wonder whether, and I'll put this to you, Glenn, do you wonder whether it had anything to do with you being children that they flew over the school?
Well, great question, and I simply don't know. But the funny thing is that this is not an infrequent thing where they seem to interact either by landing or flying over. It's a reasonably common thing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think I think the school sightings are particularly interesting. And look, it may not have anything to do with it, because for all we know, there could be other people just residents in Christchurch that saw them fly over their suburb as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's interesting that you would think, again, if that were the case, that there's people of all age groups and backgrounds in Christchurch. If they'd all cited it, then you'd think it would make the news.
Exactly right. I mean, a housewife hanging the washing in the backyard, and he was the same experience. There must have been scores of other people who witnessed it. So, yeah, not completely just, the school kids.
Well, that's why I'm just curious. I just wonder, and this is conjecture. I appreciate you not wanting to speculate, Glenn, but I just wonder, whether I don't know, whether it was not supposed to be seen, but a few of you being children, I don't know, a few of you just so happened to be able to see it. Maybe you six were the only six that witnessed these things. Who knows?
Yeah, well, the other kids must have seen it because they were looking up as well. But, you did mention earlier on a memory wipe, or goodness knows, I can't speak for them, but I can only narrow down to, half a dozen people who I can say, yep, for sure, they experienced exactly what I did.
Yeah. Look, and as I say, I appreciate anything more is starting to speculate, which isn't helpful. But it is interesting, isn't it? I might be jumping the gun here, but while we're on that, Daryl, can we just allow some speculation to take place here? I just want you to, I acknowledge that you and Glenn and a lot of my guests, as I said to you earlier, a lot of my guests have an experience. They can't explain it. They don't want to try and explain it. And I certainly don't want to put words in your mouth or get you to try and come up with an explanation. But I think it's still interesting to have the conversation. You've had a few decades now to think back on this. What are your theories or possible theories for why everyone was frozen when this happened?
Well, my theory, and it's something I've stuck to, and certainly over the last number of years, the more I've sort of delved into this, our event and things that have happened to me, which we'll discuss further on. But that particular event and how it happened, I've always believed, I've got a big belief that a lot of this UAP, UFO and our event, it's a bending of time. We don't quite understand, as humans, we don't understand how it all works in time. I mean, it's been proven with all this quantum physics that's coming out. So even the scientists are going, oh God, we don't even understand how this works, It's almost getting ahead of us of how time is and how physics works. And my belief is that was a bending of time. It's almost like that instead of them coming from the classic Alpha Centauri or whatever, it's them coming into our time and bending it, and that's how they come through. So that's where I believe that everything was frozen. And then as they leave, there's a bending of time. I mean, it might sound a very amateur's way of saying it, but that's how I can describe it. And then as they go through, that time rebends and comes back to where we are. But that's how they've come through, and that's how they move through space, as it would be, that they use a form of like time pushing through different time zones that we don't quite understand. Because funnily enough, years later, we had a friend of the family come in, and why I say this about time, he's American, and he was in the Air Force, and I, in a roundabout way, asked him about this without getting specific. We're all at a family gathering and all that, this is a number of years later when we'd started discussing all this with my brother and what have you. And I thought, I've got to tap this guy, because I don't know exactly where he went to the Air Force, but I don't know whether it was in meteorology or whatever, but I know he had some knowledge about this, or about this sort of like the weather and stuff like that. So I just said, look, just a question. I said, if you had a sunny day and, you're there standing in a field, I just said a field or wherever, and it's sunny as, and then all of a sudden, in an instant, in a blink of an eye, it turns grey, everything shuts down, it's quiet, and then bang, you're back to a sunny day, a few seconds or 30 seconds later. I said, what do you think, or what would be generally known as a cause of that? And he said, to do something like that, it would have to be a massive, like a magnetic, that's how he described it, like a magnetic field or a magnetic pull to be able to do something like that, or a magnetic field, I think he said. And to me, that's to a degree is time. In my amateur way of looking at it, it's like that's time. And my mum actually had a very good saying, and I've always stuck with this. She said, we all go through time. Okay, so we've got children, we go through, all do our different things, and I've reached my point when I'm now 58 years of age. But all that stuff that's happened still back there. It's like train stations. You go through different train stations. So that past and that time is still there, but we've gone past it. But I believe they have an ability, or whatever these things are, have an ability to move through these different time zones and these different sort of areas that we don't quite understand, and that's how they propel through. And that's how we have things like the sky change, that they're suddenly time shifting, because they've done something to our time frame that we don't quite understand. And then they pass through, and then bang, we're away again. That's my amateur's way of looking at it, I suppose.
No, that makes sense. And look, don't worry, I've not got a great grasp of physics or anything myself, but why I say it makes sense is, I've listened to hundreds, as I'm sure you have as well, listened to hundreds of these sort of various UFO encounters stories, and this element of, firstly, everything going quiet is very common. Like if someone's out in the countryside, particularly in, say, North America, and it's really loud with crickets and frogs and owls and all sorts, and then just out of nowhere just goes dead silent. And I hear that all the time, and I wonder whether, there's an element of time stopping there as well, but they've got no reference point. There's nothing moving. But you had a very special, unique encounter where this was broad daylight.
Sunny day, sunny summer day. Yep. And
weekday, school day.
School day.
And at recess or lunch or whatever it was.
Yep.
Which is incredible. So that begs the question, and look, that's still speculation, but I think that's a pretty plausible theory. I think we've got to be open to anything really, because the whole thing's crazy. But that begs the question, Daryl, why did you, your brother, your mate, your neighbours, and I think there was one other that you found out about later on, why did 6 of you not freeze and were able to sight these craft?
Yeah, well, I think from Glenn's thing, I think he was more frozen than I was, and I can't speak for Kate. That was a cousin of it. Well, we call her a cousin, but she's also a friend. But she's the one that recently sort of mentioned it to my sister about, does my brother remember something weird happening at school? So She was a neighbour across the road that ended up being like, we called them arts and everything, but they weren't really, but she was still so close to us that we, she was like a cousin, but not. And she was the one that mentioned it recently and brought it up to my sister and wanted her to mention it to Glenn. That did he remember anything weird happening at Roydvale? And this is, I'm talking years, decades and decades and decades later, that she mentioned that. And then, as I say, the other two friends that we had, they ended up going to Moscow, but we're disgusted with them. And these guys are pretty down home, salt of the earth sort of guys. I mean, I don't know what's happened. We've lost contact with them now. We don't have anything to do with them, but they're, they'd mentioned it. So, but the references, I don't know how they were, and that's it. Like, I don't know whether they were frozen, like Glenn had a different experience to me. And as I say, friend over in Australia, it's kind of like a cousin, and then the two friends who went to Mosgiel. I don't remember discussing whether they were frozen or whether they moved, but I certainly know what I did, and I certainly know that I was talking to Glenn about this, and he said, I'm pretty sure you mentioned that my other friend was one that moved. But I'm sort of, this is decades later, so I'm really vague on whether I talked to Glenn about him moving or whether he talked to me moving, because it's 50-something years down the track. But
Yeah.
I know, but as far as other people, except for Glenn and me, because we've talked about it quite a bit, but I absolutely know what I did,
Okay, so let's
know what I did.
Let's just take that. You can only speak for your experience, and that you were able to move and look around. So let's just assume it was only you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you? And this was perhaps a leading question. So I don't again want to impress anything on you. It's your story, but I kind of brought this up with Glenn last week. Do you think there's a chance? Fitting in with that theory of, them moving through space-time, manipulating space-time or whatever they were doing, that in theory you shouldn't have been able to see them. But for whatever reason, you six were. And speaking for yourself, you can only speak for yourself, but you were able to move when it appeared to you that everyone else was frozen. Yeah. And that presumably, if this is broad daylight on a weekday in Christchurch, that for that 20, 30 seconds, whatever, how long it was, that everyone else in Christchurch was also frozen.
That's right.
Have you ever thought about that? Because
yes,
I know.
Absolutely, I have. And that's what's bothered me. Because what's bothered me even more is we've got to get this into, and probably one of the biggest things we've got to get into perspective is we're right near Christchurch Airport. So we're right by an airport. We're not very far from an airport at all, so, and what's right near the airport, which I know my brothers discussed, was the deep freeze base, which was run by the United States. And so they were doing trips down to Antarctica and all that. It's still there. It's still running now. Actually, in my job when I did security, I actually was involved with doing security around that for, it's contracted out by another company just to check buildings and all that. So I'm well aware that the deep freeze base is still there. And, they're quite sensitive places, and so you would think with radars and everything else that somebody somewhere would know what's just happened or what's gone on. But as you've said, I've tried to Google it and find out any information about this incident, and it's just drawn an absolute blank.
Yeah. It's ridiculous, really, because you've got so many. There was so many opportunities for others to see it, for radar at Christchurch International Airport to pick it up, or the Americans at that base. But let's say it was nowhere near an airport. The fact that it sort of flew over these suburbs in daylight, and let's say your school was quite remote. There was, even it sounds like within the school children, because that's the next thing I want to sort of visit is Like, do you think when everything went back to normal, and I correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of didn't discuss this with your brother until later, like you didn't rush over straight afterwards, right?
No.
But everyone else, did it appear as if they were coming out of like a bit of a daydream and like, oh, what happened? Or was it just like playing pause and start again?
Pause and start. Just go. And everyone's just playing cricket and doing whatever they're doing and nothing's discussed.
So does that...
Until years later when we all just, Glenn and I start discussing it, because something obviously is triggered in our head that we start discussing this. And what's funny about this is we're discussing it, but we're not the only kids that saw it. Even the 6 of us that I know of. Well, what about the rest of the school? What about the teachers? As you said, quite rightly so, they passed over suburbs. They didn't just pass over. Our school wasn't a rural school. It was a school in Christchurch. They were surrounded by suburbs, albeit, there are a lot less people in those days as there is now. But still, you're talking about suburbs. The way they'd be flying, well, as far as I know, they'd be heading over towards Riccarton. And, if they even went there, that's what I mean about the bending of time. Well, my theory on it is, do they fly in and out? Like, do they move, or not fly? That word's not even correct, but do they move in and out and propel themselves in and out where they would disappear after they've been past our school? And that's why it became sunny. I don't know. That's the thing that's always gnawed at me a little bit, because I don't think it's just us 6. Yeah, us 6 have discussed it, but surely within that whole school, you're talking about a whole school, everybody was affected, whether they were frozen or not frozen. I'm just saying, I know I can move and look around, but maybe I'm not. As I say, I had my mate as well. We'll talk about the incident later on down the track. But what about other kids? Did other kids in another part of the school move around and look and go, man, that's weird, And that's what's always gnawed at me. Yeah, sure, the 6 close to us we know of, but you're talking about a whole school of kids and teachers,
Yeah, it seems bizarre. But then part of me thinks, just from listening to your story, that let's assume that any of the kids who may have been looking up at the sky at that time, even though when it was over, it was like hitting play and everyone just carried on as normal, you'd think if everyone saw it, that there would be some sort of collective, oh, what was that?
You would, but nothing.
But so from your perspective, did you speak to your mate? Because he was standing close to you, wasn't he?
Oh, I don't know. I can't even, to be honest with you, if I look back, I don't know where he was in the whole scheme of things. But I know later on down the track, when we're all discussing this thing, he had we'll talk about it later, but he had an incident. That's where it all came up about something happening at the same time as me, which was kind of weird and bizarre. But I don't know where he was in the school and how he moved around, what have you. But I could only talk about me. But from what Glenn was saying, this is what I mean about 50 years down the track. Glenn said, "Oh, I'm pretty sure you told me that he moved." Look, maybe I did, and because my mate and I talked about it. But as I say, you're talking 50 years down the track, and this is where things start. I know exactly what happened to me. And I know what I looked at and what I saw. But when you start talking about, what did this person say to me? Then that's when it starts getting 50 years down the track. Because I've lost contact with that mate. I did, decades ago. So I don't really have anything to do with them much all now. So I don't know exactly what I said to him or exactly, but I know things that happened to me. And I know things that happened to me on that day. And that'll never change. And that's why it's bothered me, because it's the unknown. I've just got absolutely no clue. And it's gnawed at me as to what was this and why was I allowed to look around? Why was I allowed to see that Batsman take his shot with frozen in time? Why was I allowed to look around at school looking up and then I look up? Why was I able to, if this is a time shifting of time, why was I able to move around in it? That's probably, and I don't know whether it should or shouldn't, but that's always bothered me a wee bit as to, I don't know why, but it's just always bothered me as to why was I able to move and everyone else well, everyone that I know of didn't really sort of look around or see different scenes of a Batsman, or no one's even discussed that with me. That's been close to me in this incident. So, that's, yeah.
Well, let's unpack that a little bit, because, yeah, I mean, on face value, of course, I think anyone would wonder, why me? Why was I able to move around, and why did I see this thing? Why did no one else talk about it? But and that's a pretty natural response, of course. But it's obviously plagued you for decades. It's played on your mind. Can we explore that a bit deeper, like how it has affected you? Did it, I suppose, did you wonder, again, not trying to put words in your mouth, but did you wonder whether you were meant to see it, it was for you, or it was a mistake? Or do you have any theories?
Well, that's the thing, is I don't know. My biggest thing that's gnawed at me is the different experience I had to everyone else. And whether it should gnaw at me, I don't know. But obviously there's other things that happened since then, which we'll talk about, which have come to play on my mind as to why was I able to shift and move around. I haven't sort of deep dived in. I don't believe it was just for me. I don't believe that. I think it was an incident that happened that, as I say, like the bending of time, I think it affected the whole school. That's why, or the whole school that I know of, could have affected further in suburbs, I don't know. But as far as the school goes, I don't think it's just us six. That's why I think it's important the story gets out there, because it's the whole school you're talking about, And so I don't think it was just for me, but I had a different experience, and that's what's bothered me. And I can't put my finger on it as to why it bothers me, but it bothers me that I could move and I could see these things. And I think that's probably the best way I can explain it. I can't put my finger on why it bothers me, but it's certainly, as I've got older, call it a mortality thing. As you get older, you want to get this out there because you think, hang on, this is big. This is, this needs to be talked about and discussed. And it can't just be us six that saw it or had different experiences and everything. There's got to be other people. There's far-ranging, right from kids in the school to teachers to air traffic controllers, deep freeze base, whatever. I mean, there's got to be something bigger than this to have absolutely zilch, zero come up about it at all is probably not fascinated me. It's bothered me more than anything as to why, because I don't know whether you know about these incident, quite a famous incident, and I only, when over the last number of years, I've sort of, as I've got older, as I say, this has become quite poignant to me to try and deep dive as to what the heck's gone on here. That's why the UFO thing's interested me more and more and more. But as I know, I'm also well aware there's plenty of weird stuff that goes on the outside of it as well. So I try to be as open-minded as possible. But there's that incident that happened in South Africa and with the kids that were at a school. But theirs was a lot different because they actually had a third kind incident, close encounter of the third kind, where they actually had beings come to them and talk telepathically to them and, and what have you. And I'm certainly not going to sit there and go with a load of rubbish, because I'm like, after what's happened to me, I'm like, well, yeah, I can kind of get what's going on here, that this is really, to a degree, really traumatized these kids to a degree. It's stuck with them all their lives, and that's what it's done to me. Yeah, no, I didn't have a same thing as them where I had beings come down and telepathically try and say something to me, but I had a pretty big thing happen, and it's bothered me, and I can't, like you said before, it's when you can't explain it, it's that's what's really unsettled me. And as I've got older, it's unsettled me more. And when I started delving into some of the subjects, and quite well-known cases and all that, and if you look at the UAPs, as they say now, that a lot of them fly over very sensitive areas. They seem to appear in sensitive areas, whether it be nuclear sites or radio transmitter sites, or whatever. Well, hang on a minute. Well, you've got an airport and a deep freeze base. And that deep freeze base did a lot of flying of aircraft back and forth to Antarctica and back and what have you. And there's, I don't know what went on there with the deep freeze base, but it was a big part of Christchurch, and still is, for years. So to me, I would imagine, because it's US soil and it's US personnel and there was US military people there, that's a reasonably sensitive site. And so you've got these things appearing, near that area,
Yeah, and it's funny you should bring that up because I asked Glenn about that as well. That was one of my questions I had written down for you too, was whether you were familiar with any other primary school sightings. You're referring to Ruwa, Zimbabwe. I'm just bringing it up now. It was on the 16th of September 1994. Yeah, I discussed that with Glenn. Incredible story.
Yep.
Now, have you heard of the Westall, Melbourne sighting in the 60s?
Yep. I was actually
familiar.
brought that up. Yeah, I brought that up when I was Googling the trying to find information about our sighting, and that one came up as well. So, you're talking about teachers and everyone saw these craft and that,
Well, granted, it was spectacular as well because some of the kids ran over to the Grange. Actually, when I lived in Melbourne, I went and visited the place. I visited the exact spot that the craft landed, so that was pretty cool. So that, granted, that didn't happen in your case, but there are interesting parallels because it's middle of the day, school day, flies over a primary school, but the difference being everyone sees it. All the teachers, the kids, and then when I went to the actual site, they have like a little memorial. They've made some fun out of it. They've turned a UFO into a playground and stuff. But they have a little information thing, and one side of it says corroborating witnesses, and it talks about all of the other people that just live in the surrounding suburbs.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just people at school. That's the story we hear. It was all these other people. So, and I know this is what bugs you. It bugs me as well, just hearing it. The difference being, and why I think your encounter is unique, is that, surely, okay, some people, you don't want to talk about it because you don't want to be seen to be crazy.
That's right.
But, when so many people see it, it flies over in broad daylight over a suburb, which is exactly what happened in your case, as well as the airport and the deep freeze, then surely at that point, if everyone had seen it, or anyone that happened to be sort of vaguely looking at the sky, it would have been in the media, but there's nothing about this online.
Absolutely nothing. No, there's absolutely zero. And as I said, considering it's right, and I mean, it's right close to Christchurch Airport. I mean, Roydvale Primary School is not very far, a few K away from the airport. That's why we lived all our lives, as I said, near the airport, watched air shows. That's why I always always say that I know what a plane looks like. Certainly when I look up on a plane, I know what a plane looks like. And those were not planes. They were not the standard aircraft, because, as I say, I've laid in Burnside Park looking up as a jumbo jet's gone overhead as it's landing on a northwest day, because it comes over a certain way over. It still does to this day. It comes a certain way over Burnside Park, and because of the northwest winds, it has to land that way. And this jumbo or this big plane would come over, and I used to love it because I feel like I could touch it. So, I mean, we were well used to planes and everything. We know what a plane sounds like, and they make a sound for a start. They don't change the sky. I can tell you that right now. And so absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, it's just me and my opinion. Those were not planes, period. And you can't explain that to me because, as I said, they made no noise. They were pretty closely packed together in that formation as they came across, and nothing like military aircraft. And I've seen them as well when I was young and as I got older, and seen not that long. I think it was a F111 or something that was flying, doing flyovers near Christchurch Airport as it was coming through. And I mean, they've had sort of many planes that come over for warbirds over Wanaka and all that. So yeah, I know what a plane looks like. That's no plane. As I said, certainly no plane changes the sky and then instantly sends it back to sunny day again, from sunny to cloudy to sunny, and everything freezes in time. I don't remember any plane doing that when it's ever come overhead,
No, very, very strange.
Yeah, it is, and that's what I mean. It's gnawed at me, and I think what's gnawed at me is the fact that, yeah, like you said, we're near the deep freeze base, so we're near an airport, we're in a residential area. Yeah, there's nothing, zero. Like as you say, you got the one in Melbourne, you've got the South African ones, you've got all these people too, but got absolutely zero about our incident, and that's kind of bothered me. It's annoyed me because it's like, why? Why is it just? It's been absolutely nothing about it. And I suppose that to a degree, I don't know whether Glenn thinks this, but I can't remember whether I've actually discussed this one, but maybe I'm so glad I've been able to talk to you because it's just an ability to get it out. You just never know. Someone goes, man, oh God, or it triggers a memory. Someone goes, you know what? I remember that, or they've never talked about it to anyone because people look at you still to this day. Some people look, oh, these people are mad, or can do. Well, not that I care, never really cared about that. But, at the end of the day, I know what I saw, what happened. But, there's plenty of other people out there that would go, I don't really want to talk about this. They might be in business or just in jobs. They just don't want this sort of thing coming out. You've probably experienced that.
Yeah, of course. But I know people have said this in every generation, but the times they are changing. You may have mentioned at the start, Glenn, so apologies if you did, but remind me, roughly how long do you think they passed over you and how fast they were going?
Oh, okay. It did not go on for very long at all. It would have been in the region of, it was definitely under half a minute, I'd say. Maybe 20 seconds. But they weren't flying real fast.
No.
They were not going like, they didn't zip across the sky. They were flying, almost like at a speed of, military aircraft, basically.
Yeah, right. Yeah, wow. Because if you think about it, although 20 seconds isn't long, it actually, to be witnessing something so remarkable, that is actually quite a long time to be watching these things pass over.
It is, and, I'm, again, just kind of guessing it might have been longer than 20 seconds, but it certainly wasn't like, no way was it a minute, nothing like that. It was definitely under a minute, and I would say, from memory, definitely under 30 seconds.
No, but that's I think a good indicator, because even if you'd said it was 5 seconds, that would be enough to be have an imprint in your mind, I think. So
yeah, it was definitely more than 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
I watched them as from going from right to left and followed them. And see, again, I can't remember whether they just faded out of view as in disappeared from view because, they were flying far away from us. I don't think that was the case. Something happened. We just snapped back and, they were gone.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And I mean, if you were just as I suppose sharing these stories tends to take you back somewhat. Just is there anything else when you think back? Anything else? Any other features of the day, of the sensation, or the appearance of the craft themselves? Any other details that you want to add, Glenn?
No, not really. I just think it just struck me, just the stillness and quietness, and that weather change was strange. And the funny thing is nowadays that my favourite day, and I don't know why, my favourite day is a warm, still, overcast day. I'm not saying that they've imprinted that on me or anything. It's just funny that those are the days I really love, and that's what it felt like to me when I witnessed that. It was very still, quiet, overcast, and it was a warm day. So,
would you describe it as peaceful or?
Peaceful, definitely. Yeah, there was nothing intimidating about it. But even as a kid of about 10 years of age, I knew what I was seeing was rather strange.
Was it peaceful because of the quiet, or was there another sort of eerie element almost to it? Or
There's
do you know what I
nothing
mean?
eerie. No,
No.
nothing eerie about it at all. Nothing frightening about it. It was just weird.
An interesting timestamp. Literally just before our conversation, I just got done watching a new special, a new interview with a Special Forces whistleblower.
Yeah. I've just been watching it. Yeah.
You watched it too on News Nation.
Yeah, News Nation with Ross Coulthard.
Yeah, good on you with Ross Coulthard. Yeah. Isn't he incredible?
Yeah. Oh. Funnily enough, I got hold of them. They're one of through. They had a way of. I emailed them, but I never heard back from them. But look, I understand. Yeah, but Glenn went another route with another UFO place that's well known here in New Zealand.
MUFON, was it?
No, it's UFocus, I think it is.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure that's who Glenn went through, but I actually saw a Ross Coulthard interview with a lot of the whistleblowers and all that. Yeah, look, I have my theories on some things, but people have obviously seen some pretty odd things out there, and they're very, very highly decorated people. And you're putting yourself out on the line here to look like a fool. And why would you do that? There's nothing in it for you to do that, So especially if you're a well-ranked officer or you're in the military, there's nothing. Yeah. There's nothing in it for you to suddenly put yourself out there and say, "Hey, man, this is what I saw."
Exactly.
And, because why? Why would you do that? You may just go, "I'll just put that in my back pocket and forget about it," and that never happened, and just get on with life, But they don't. They put themselves out there for, sometimes ridicule, sometimes backlash from their own superiors, So. I look at that and go, why would you do that? I'm just, I'm a guy that just works here in Christchurch, New Zealand, but those people have a hell of a lot to lose, And I look at it and I've followed this quite heavily, and probably even more so in the last year to 2 or 3 years, and even to the point of, David Fraser with his thing with the Nimitz in 2004 with the Tic Tac, and I followed that big time as to what happened there and what he saw and what went on. And I'm like, there's stuff that us as human beings, we just don't get. We just don't get it, that's just trying to get this sort of stuff out there so people have a bit of an idea of some of the things that have gone on and are going on right now. And I think it's quite important. You've got guys like Ryan Graves, guys that were fighter pilots. David Fraser was a Top Gun pilot and also an instructor with Top Gun. Why would he come out and, talk rubbish about stuff like this?
It's ridiculous. Yeah, it actually gets to the point, I think I mentioned this with Glenn, it gets to the point where to take the position that this is all false, whether they're lying or whether, hallucinating or, whatever excuse you can make up, just because it's unexplainable and absolutely fantastical and ridiculous, it actually takes a greater stretch, I think, to suggest that, no, they're not telling the truth. I mean, as you say, they have got so much to lose, both personally and professionally, and you'll know from the interview that you just watched as well. This will be an interesting timestamp, I think, as well, because people might be listening to this years later, and the interview we just watched may be a pivotal moment in UFO history.
Yeah.
His name was Jake Barber, and we're recording on New Zealand time, Sunday, 19th of January, 2025. He was crying at one point, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, you've got one up on me. I haven't finished watching it yet, so I've still got to. Yeah.
But I spoiled it.
No, that's okay. I don't mind spoiler alerts, but that's it. That's okay. I've just started watching it, but I just found it very interesting. And I mean, as I say, I've followed this topic for obvious reasons. I've followed this topic quite heavily, and because it's become more mainstream now than it was before, which is a good thing, I think. I followed. He's a very, like, you would have heard of Lou Elizondo, right?
Of course, yeah.
He's a very polarizing character.
Yes, he is.
But the thing is, once again, a highly decorated and skillful guy in the military, and then further when he was part of ATIP and that. So these aren't stupid people, and it's like, as he said, he's not saying it's this or it's that, but he said everything that's happening out there is kind of strange, and it's way outside of what we know as the theories of how planes work and how craft work. So even if it's just that, we just take that into account, that these things are doing things that are not possible. How, like with David Fravor, you would have heard and followed that thing, how do you have a craft that drops from 80,000 feet to sea level in an instant? And they were seeing these things doing this on radar from the Nimitz and all that, and from that group of ships or that, for days, before the incident that you had with the Tic Tac. So yeah, and something funny, like without going sort of all over the place, but how I said the bending of time, and in that incident, if you remember, David Fravor said the Tic Tac was there, and then instantly it was gone, and then it arrived at their cat point.
Yes,
the cat point. To me, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's a bending of time. It didn't just take off at a great rate of knots. It actually shifted in an area and in a zone or a time frame that we don't even understand. And that's why they were looking at it, and then it's gone, and then it arrives. That's instant. That's not, it put some afterburners on and then it flew off at 1,200 kilometers per hour. No. It went bang, bang, and it's at the cat point instantly later. And they're being told it's at your cat point, where they had to go next. That's where they were meant to go. And it's already there. To me.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It does feed into the same theory. And we talked about this offline, but we're going to do I think a second recording where you've had some other incidents, but we'll wrap this story up soon. But just a couple of final points. Yeah, not to flog a dead horse, I know I've kept on about what you think happened, what your theories are, but taking Commander David Fravor's story, for example, seeing as you brought it up, okay. So presumably, in that time that they saw it and then it vanished and then it reappeared at their cat point, as you say, that sort of feeds in with this theory of bending of space-time or whatever.
Yep.
So do you think, because I guess I'll just say it, that this is perhaps my immediate thoughts based on what you and Glenn have described, is that with your experience, that's what they were doing. They were sort of in the middle of, zipping off, bending space-time, which for most people you shouldn't be able to see. But for whatever reason, at least 6 of you, it didn't work on. You sort of were able to see through that. Would that be? Yeah. Would that be your thinking?
But I still believe it's not just us 6. I believe deep down in people's psyche somewhere, it's in a lot more people that were involved in this whole school sighting.
Roydvale Primary School is in Burnside, is it?
Yep.
Yes.
Burnside area. Yep.
Or I guess anywhere travelling at the airport, anyone that's working at the deep freeze, anyone in the surrounding suburbs. What is your message to them if they are holding a story similar to yours close to their heart? What's your message to those people if they are out there?
Well, I think just to get the message out and just talk about it and just, say what you saw and what you experienced, because I think the more people that come out and say these things, it'll paint a bit of a picture. And because you can feel a little bit lost, and I certainly can, because apart from my brother and what have you, and a few close friends and what have you, it's something, as I say, that's gnawed at me. So if it's gnawing at you and you haven't discussed it, and maybe even get hold of you, it only takes a message on the Cosmic Banter, comment section to make a comment, and then, for you to be able to get hold of them. So it's not that difficult. And that could be, if they want to remain fairly anonymous, but just tell their story, well, go for it. That's all you have to do. I mean, as I say, I don't care about things like that anymore. I'm beyond worrying about being anonymous. I'm not really worried about that. But at the end of the day, if that's what you want, just get that message out there. If you have seen something in those periods of time and it's bothered you and you just haven't discussed it.
Well, I echo that. Please get in touch with me through any of my social media, YouTube, comment section of Spotify, anything. Pretty contactable. And I mean, for me, I'm just happy that we've got at least one corroborating witness for this story. But I think for your closure and Glenn's as well, I'm really hearing that you would both love to know whether anyone else saw it, and so for your sake, I hope that people do reach out. We'll keep in touch with Glenn as well, and I hope to, if not before I release this, but even if it's after the fact, really look forward to anyone else reaching out who saw something. So thanks so much, Daryl, and
thanks,
we'll chat very soon.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about it anyway, because it's said sometimes that's enough to just get a weight off, just to, not just talking to your brother and over the years having sort of discussed it with friends, but teachers talk to someone like you that has an interest in it, and we can kind of get it out there on a platform. I think it's important. It does take just that little bit of a weight off me to at least just get it out there.
Yeah, exactly. I'm so glad you were able to do on my show, Glenn. And
well, I really appreciate the fact that you've given me the chance.
Yeah, it's kind of funny though. There's, just like you said, your friend in Australia, and you're not really in touch with, and the neighbours are down south now, and you don't know if anyone else really saw it. You're not in touch with anyone, but who knows? Just as I happened to find your comment on YouTube a year later, and you were quite keen to ensure that this story wasn't lost, and now it isn't, at least your side of the story. Who knows? This episode may find those other people, and if they are listening, be that 5 years down the track, that's fine. I'd encourage you to reach out to me, and I can perhaps pass on your details to Glenn as well.
Then wouldn't it be great if someone did hear it, someone who, we hadn't even thought of, and says, oh, yes, I remember that. Puts their hand up and comes forward about it, because, as I said, dozens of children witness this.
Yeah, it would be great. But thank you, Glenn, so much for your time. That was a fantastic story, and good on you for reaching out and not letting this, I suppose, the story die. It's in the history books now.
Yeah, well, thank you, Steve, for getting in contact. I really appreciate giving me the opportunity to share it with you and your audience.
Thanks. That's great, Glenn. Thanks so much.